Hello and welcome to the Transfers podcast, powered by FootballTransfers.com, where we bring you news, insight and analysis on that most important of the least important things, football. I'm delighted to welcome back Duncan Castles to the show. This is where we insert some applause in the sound effects board if we had such a thing. But we just welcome Duncan back, and I hope you had a nice break, Duncan.
I did. Great break in Scotland and France, and glad to see you made it back from your reserve caddying duties at Portrush.
Yeah. It was a great weekend for golf, and my boss Paul McDonald was over enjoying it. I imagine he enjoyed the beverages that were on view and on display as well over the weekend. So a great weekend was had by all.
Good. We'll get Paul back on the podcast maybe just after the window's done to do a bit of market analysis, which he's so good at. But a lot happening in the market at the moment.
Yeah, it's been a busy few weeks, and it seems to be even more heating up this week. But in the meantime, as always, we have YouTube memberships, which you can sign up to, become a member of our YouTube channel. You can see our highlights, clips, nice little shorts, the full episodes as videos there, and get some treats and exciting things to keep you informed and entertained. So if you want to sign up there, please do. We would really appreciate it. But in the meantime, let's talk about strikers, because it seems to be a week where Premier League clubs are trying to sign strikers because goals win games.
Yeah, I think there's a good chance we'll see some very big deals going through this week. There's a lot of action at present. We have seen Liverpool kind of mess around with Newcastle United over the past week or so, making an approach and floating the idea of a £120 million offer for Alexander Isak, which Newcastle have turned down. Unsurprisingly, they've been adamant that they don't want to see their best player leave. Although some interesting comments from Eddie Howe about Isak's absence from their pre-season friendly at the weekend, and where he talked about Isak as being irreplaceable, said there'd been no formal approach for him. Always the devil's in the detail with these kind of wordings. Then was asked whether he could guarantee that Isak would be a Newcastle player for the next season, and he said, "I think it's difficult for me to ever give 100% clarity on any player. I'd never do that because it's football and you never know what could happen. All I can say is that Alex is happy at Newcastle. He loves the players that he plays with, the staff, the team. Certainly, I'm confident that he's going to be here at the start of the season." So I'd be a little bit worried about that if I was a Newcastle United fan. I'd also pay attention to the fact that they went and bid for Hugo Ekitike, player we flagged up on this podcast as someone who we expected to be central to the fight amongst Premier League clubs for forwards this summer. That bid was rejected by Eintracht Frankfurt, but Eintracht Frankfurt are now on the point of selling Ekitike to Liverpool, who, after having had that approach to Newcastle turned down, immediately went and started negotiating with Frankfurt and basically gazumped Newcastle's attempt to sign a player who they've been trying to sign for several years now, has to be said. We're waiting to see what the specific details of the transfer fee are, but we know that there's basic agreement between the two clubs. We also know that Frankfurt are briefing that if all the variable payments in the deal between Liverpool and Frankfurt for Ekitike are achieved, that it will represent a club record fee. From the Liverpool end, figures of €80 million guaranteed have been briefed. One thing to note here is that the sporting chief executive at Frankfurt, Markus Krösche, not only is he very accomplished at selling particularly strikers for high fees, but he and Frankfurt have a reputation within the industry for sometimes maybe embellishing the numbers they brief to the press. It's certainly not the case that Frankfurt have received all of the money, the €95 million that they briefed out as being their current record fee for Randall Kolo Muani, who they sold to Paris Saint-Germain a few years ago. Paris Saint-Germain play a role in all of this, in that they loaned Ekitike to Frankfurt in January 2024 within what was close to an obligatory option to buy, and they are due to receive 30% of the Bundesliga club's profit on the sale of Ekitike. Look, I think this is it's a really interesting deal for Liverpool. They clearly, when they came into the picture, they convinced the player very quickly it was the right place to come to. There'd been competition not just from Newcastle United, but also from Chelsea and Manchester United for the player. As we discussed in previous podcasts, he's not yet hit the peak of his abilities as a player, but he is both a very good passer and very quick, an excellent dribbler in the box, a decent finisher who could improve in that respect. But last season was already contributing 19 goals and 11 assists in 45 Bundesliga and Europa League games. Made Bundesliga Team of the Year. If you want to look at SciSports estimated transfer values, he comes out on that algorithm at 57.7 million. So I think you can see that Liverpool are paying a significant premium, whatever that final price turns out to be. And we wait and see how he meshes in what's going to be a super interesting forward line with another player from the Bundesliga, Florian Wirtz, already signed and ready to join in. And of course, Mohamed Salah still playing from the right wing for them next season.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how Wirtz and Ekitike kind of adapt to the Premier League, because we've seen players in the past adapt brilliantly. Kevin De Bruyne being the star example of that, obviously. But we've seen other players in the Bundesliga adapt maybe not so brilliantly. Timo Werner is the star at the other end of the pile. So I think it'll be interesting to see how these two players kind of get on at Liverpool, but signs are promising so far for Florian Wirtz. He had 2 assists in the behind closed door friendly with Stoke on Sunday, so that kind of is a positive for Liverpool fans to cling on to. And Ekitike, I think, should do well. I think he's obviously a player who was asked to shoulder a lot of responsibility at Eintracht Frankfurt last season from January onwards, because Omar Marmoush was sold to Man City. He was another big striker they sold for a lot of money. That's what they do, as you said. That's what they do. They sell strikers for lots of money. But yeah, once Marmoush was out of the picture, he kind of came into his own. Not that he was poor before then, but he had to do a lot of things on his own because he was kind of the only star attraction up front, the only man that was able to contribute to goals, and he did enough, and he did more than enough to help them get into the Champions League. And it's a long time since Frankfurt have been in the European Cup. So yeah, he was kind of, he showed that he could step up to the plate, that he could be the man that was needed in big matches and at big moments. And I think that's why Liverpool are looking to him. I know some people are kind of worried about the fee, or the fee may be more expensive than expected, and the TV kind of ties into that they are paying more than his estimated transfer value. But I think that's what you have to do in today's market when you're looking for a striker, because there are so few of them that can guarantee goals or guarantee performances. And Ekitike did that down the final stretch with Frankfurt and got them into the Champions League, and you can't really argue with the form he was in. He was excellent with Omar Marmoush, so I have no reason to think why he won't be excellent with Mo Salah or Florian Wirtz. And I think Liverpool fans will be very impressed by what they end up getting from Hugo Ekitike.
Yeah, a very adaptable player. He can play behind a centre forward. He can play as a centre forward. You can play him off the wings. As I say, very quick, but also very good in tight spaces. So there is, everyone I speak to who assesses his game says there is scope for him to go well above what he's achieved already. And I think that's what Liverpool are buying there. And I think you're right to highlight that it's a difficult market for strikers. And that's why we see someone like Ekitike, who's still developing, achieving such a high price, because there are limited options for the clubs that want to improve an attack. And, you know, as is the case almost every summer, pretty much every club does want to improve an attack.
Yeah, it's always the most simplest answer to the question after sacking your manager. saying that's always how do you change your results is to sack the manager firstly. But if you've tried that or you're happy enough with your manager, the next approach is always to buy you forward or someone to get you more goals. And I think Ekitike can perhaps do that at Liverpool. And we've seen the current number 9 they have there, Darwin Núñez, when they signed him, a lot was expected of him, but they signed him as a player who massively overperformed his expected goals, whereas Ekitike is the opposite. He underperformed his expected goals. So in theory, Ekitike should improve if he's to come to the expected goals mark. So he should be getting better and better, and under Arne Slot and playing with a better quality of teammate. He really should. And yeah, I think it is going to be a clever signing for Liverpool, and it will be another shrewd sale for Eintracht Frankfurt because they're going to get a lot of money. Maybe not as much money as they're saying, but like you said, that Randall Kolo Muani sale was the big one that they were saying it was 95 million, but he never obviously met the bonuses or the add-ons because he didn't really shine at PSG, and I think he's close to leaving PSG again this summer.
Yeah, I think this is a deal that could happen this week. Kolo Muani was loaned to Juventus for the second half of last season. The decision being made by Luis Enrique that he didn't fit the style of attack that Enrique built and won the European Cup and pretty much everything else with last season. Kolo Muani is actually quite a similar player to Alexander Isak in that he's a player for the depth, pace, a finisher, and not as technical as the kind of forwards that Luis Enrique prefers to use. His loan at Juventus was kind of an advertising loan, straight loan with no option to buy, and a successful one in that he scored 10 goals in 19 Serie A appearances and Club World Cup games for the Italian side. Juventus want to keep him, but have not been able as yet to meet the asking price for Paris Saint-Germain, who would like to achieve 50 million euros as a transfer fee for Kolo Muani. Current estimated transfer value in our analytics 32.9 million, but that's dropped a lot in the last couple of months. It was above 50 not that long ago. Unsurprisingly, there's interest from England because there's been interest from England in Kolo Muani for years. He went to PSG ahead of interest from clubs including Manchester United. What I'm hearing from the French end is that there's been inquiries from Manchester United about his availability, but I don't think they are as advanced as they are with other clubs. Newcastle United are involved in this conversation, and I think at present it looks like they are the most likely destination for Kolo Muani. And again, this makes you wonder what is happening with Isak because of his similarities to Isak as a player. I'm not saying that the two couldn't be paired together, but pairing Hugo Ekitike with Alexander Isak was a simple process, an easy thing to do, and you would be bringing a player into the club who could be Isak's successor if Isak decided to leave at some point or an offer came in that was so high Newcastle felt they had to accept it. With Kolo Muani, I think it would take a change in Eddie Howe's tactical setup to play the two together. Of course, a club of that dimension, with its resources, with Champions League football, can argue that they want to have two players in each position of the ability to start Champions League games, and that could be the strategy there. Add Kolo Muani, have Isak, have your cover, retain both for the season, compete the two against each other, and it's certainly, if he can return to his status that he had in the European game when he joined Paris Saint-Germain, then 50 million euros as a transfer fee, and they might be able to achieve less than that, would be a good investment, and picking up the player at the right time and at a time when he certainly has a lot to prove in his next move and will be desperate to make it a success. Just 26 years of age, full France international, 3 years left in his contract at Paris, so they are in a strong negotiating position in terms of what they decide to accept. but in a more difficult position in the sense that it's very clear that Enrique doesn't want Kolo Muani at the club. There was a decision to actively shift him out because he was a problem in the dressing room in terms of not getting game time last season, and that worked very well for them, of course, in the second half of last season. So pay attention to that one and see if he ends up in the Premier League in the next few days.
Yeah, I think he'd be a shrewd signing for Newcastle, obviously as a partner for Isak or a replacement for Isak, depending on his future. But yeah, he's one of these players where his stock is kind of maybe at his lowest at the moment. So
lowest for a long time, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. It is the right time to buy him, and obviously the estimated transfer value matches that. But if you look at how he performed for Juventus in the second half of last season, I think he showed why he was so highly rated and so highly valued at one stage. And he's still a young player. He still has room for development. So I think he could be a player who can regain his best form. He just has to be in the right environment. And like you said, that wasn't at PSG because Luis Enrique obviously favoured a different style of play. He doesn't have necessarily an old school number 9 or a specific number 9. And you saw the same with Gonzalo Ramos. Wasn't getting a lot of chances either. And this PSG team, it kind of worked out well in Enrique's favour. They won the Champions League. They won it comfortably. And yeah, Kolo Muani has to find somewhere else to play football in the future. And why not Newcastle? Because Isak himself has come on so well at Newcastle. There's no reason Kolo Muani with the kind of raw tools he has and the ability he has on the ball can't be a success there either.
Yeah, and you mentioned Gonzalo Ramos there. He is actually another factor in this pursuit of centre forwards in the summer window. He's not actively on the market. Paris Saint-Germain would happily retain him. He did get, if you look at the actual numbers and consider that he was injured for a part of the first half of the season, he actually got quite a lot of game time last year and scored a substantial number of goals. They basically left it up to Gonzalo Ramos to make a decision as to whether he wants to move this summer, which will be based on the offers that are presented to him. He has been offered around clubs by his representatives. There is significant interest, and it's simply one of those deals where the player will be allowed to decide what he wants to do. Paris Saint-Germain not unhappy with him. He fits their squad system at present, but if someone presents a big enough offer and the player wants to move, he can go, and he could end up being one of the players picked up by a Premier League club. He looks like he's suited to Premier League football, one of the clubs who don't get their first choice targets.
Yeah, he seems a good plan B for PSG currently at the moment, but also maybe a good plan B for a Premier League club looking for a striker in the next few weeks and before the transfer window closes.
The Transfers podcast is running an audience survey at the moment. If you have a few minutes to fill it in, please do, and give us your thoughts on the show and guide us in ways in which we can improve it and bring you better content going forward. The link is in the show notes and also on our social media platforms.
Another big name that we've spoken about plenty on the programme before is Victor Gyokeres, and he's still not Arsenal. It's still not happened.
Arsenal. Yeah,
we're still waiting.
I was hoping I wouldn't have to do another section on Gyokeres. As interesting as it all is, I thought it would be resolved by now. Because while I was away, Arsenal and Sporting came to an agreement, as Steve Kay detailed on the last podcast, on the outline of the transfer fee. That agreement was 63.5 million euros guaranteed, plus 10 million euros of performance-related payments, and that came the week before last. That agreement was made. However, Sporting have managed to prevent that from going to completion, because I think it's fair to say they've been over demanding on the nature of those variable payments. So they essentially want that 10 million euros contractually determined in a way that it's effectively guaranteed. The information I have is what they were asking for is 2.5 million euros after Gyokeres plays 20 games, another 2.5 million after he plays a further 20 games, 2.5 million euros when Arsenal qualify for the Champions League, and the final 2.5 million euros for playing 20 games next season. Now, Arsenal understandably are saying, look, we've already come up on price over the number you promised Gyokeres he could leave for, which was 60 million euros plus 10 million euros. You have to make the variable payments genuine variable payments, not something that is effectively a guaranteed fee, and they've refused to pay that. Second factor here is that Arsenal requested to pay the transfer fee in 4 instalments. Sporting are not against that, but they want an extra 1.2 million euros on top as compensation for having to wait across the 4 instalments. That basically represents the amount they will be charged by the banks for going to the banks and saying, we've got 73.5 million euros of transfer due to us. We'd like to borrow against that amount. Additional to this, Gyokeres' agents have relinquished their rights to a 10% payment from Sporting on Gyokeres' transfer fee out. So when they signed the initial contract, when Gyokeres came to Sporting 2 seasons ago, they had a deal in as part of that in which they had the exclusive mandate to sell the player should he ever leave Sporting. We've talked previously about what targets they were expected to achieve and how much they would be paid for that. And they would get 10% of the transfer fee. They have said they won't take that, which effectively allows Sporting to add another, over 7 million to their net take on the fee, which gets them closer to the 80 million euros that their president, Federico Varandas, has been saying he would not sell the player for less than. All of this has turned into a huge conflict, an even bigger conflict between Gyokeres and Sporting than there was before. Arsenal have not quite walked away from the table, but have gone silent. I think Sporting were expecting them to present improved terms, and Arsenal have not done that. The player obviously wants to go. Everything is agreed between Arsenal and Gyokeres. Gyokeres has been consistent from the very start that Arsenal was the club he wanted to go to, and has gone through quite a difficult process of going public and going on strike, refusing to attend pre-season training to force the move. Last week on Wednesday, Sporting wrote to Gyokeres to inform him he was in breach of contract, to which his lawyers replied saying they didn't feel he was in breach of contract because Gyokeres had promises from the club that they would allow him to leave this summer if his agents brought a certain fee, and the club had reneged on those promises. So there's now a legal dispute between player and club in the background. And a general sense that I'm getting from Portugal is that Sporting want to make this as difficult for Gyokeres as possible. They're not happy with the behaviour of the agents. They're not happy with the way this has become public. And that's feeding into these final negotiations. There was a story in Portugal over the weekend that Manchester United had come in and gone over the top of Arsenal's offer, and that Sporting were very close to agreeing a transfer fee with Manchester United for Gyokeres. I'm told by sources at Manchester United that that's not true, and also by people close to Gyokeres that it's absolutely not true. And even if it were true, Gyokeres would not go to Manchester United. He has chosen to go to Arsenal, and he will continue to force that move because he believes that he has an agreement with the club that the club has reneged on, and they should meet the conditions of what was what was decided at the beginning of last season, which you can, if you want to know the full details of, go back to one of our earlier pods when we discussed all of that.
Yeah, and you probably noticed I'm not as polished back then, but after all this experience, I'm much more polished now. And polished is something that Arsenal are looking for in a striker, and that's what we mentioned last week when Steve was on the podcast, that Šeško and Gyokeres obviously seemed like the better target for them, the number 9 to score the goals. And this is what we've been talking about so far. And on this episode is lots of strikers, and strikers score goals, and Gyokeres is a license to print money, as they say in other industries, but he's a license to score goals in Portugal. So Arsenal are hoping the same, but I think Sporting are hoping he is a license to print money.
Yes, they're trying to extract as much from that final exit as they can. 97 goals in 102 games for Sporting. Fascinating to see, assuming this does go through, how he performs in that Arsenal team and how close to those numbers he can get playing up front for Arsenal, and whether he is that final piece that, as we like to call him, the Gigolo assassin. Mikel Arteta blamed their failure to win the Premier League on last season. He's been talking this week, saying despite having signed Martin Zubimendi, Christian Nurgo from Brentford, Noni Madueke from Chelsea, and Kepa Arrizabalaga, also from Chelsea, obviously played for Bournemouth last season, and we believe they also have a deal in place for Christian Mosquera, given that they've already taken photographs of him, the Valencia centre-back, in an Arsenal kit and accidentally released him to the media this week. I think we can expect that one to go through before too long. Arteta saying, in terms of numbers, we are short and we have to improve the depth and the quality of the squad. He says it's like shaking the tree again, bringing new faces, they bring new excitement, new energy as well.
Yeah, it's what fans kind of want. It's why the transfer industry is such a big industry these days. It's kind of fans are kind of looking to what we can do, who we can bring in, and yeah, it makes Arsenal fans very excited. And I think that they would be very excited by having a proper number 9 after kind of years of being starved of one. And in the past, they had so many great number 9s, and Gyokeres can hopefully be a number 9 like some of the legends they've had at the club before. So yeah, it should be an interesting season for Arsenal to see if he is the missing piece, if that's what they need, if these players are pushing them from not winning trophies to winning trophies.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to see if Arteta thinks it's simply about putting new personnel in place of the individuals he had last season and having backup. And obviously with someone like Madueke, they're buying cover for their best player, Bukayo Saka, on the right wing, and they're buying it at a high price, which is, a sign of real intent. But for me, and I think for a lot of people I speak to in football, the problem with Arsenal wasn't simply injuries that they suffered last season and not having key players in key positions. They actually weren't that good as a football team, in the sense of they're pretty one-dimensional, very good defensively, but not great at creating chances, and quite predictable in the way they played. And I'm not entirely sure that if Arteta stays with the system but adds a lot of extra bodies and high quality bodies, that adding those high quality bodies is going to be sufficient to turn second place into first place. We'll see. I mean, there's also the question of how Liverpool integrate all those new players into the system and whether they actually go backwards in the short term with having too many new players in there, although they're improving the quality of their overall squad. Football can surprise you with these things quite easily.
I think what you need to do, Duncan, is trust the process. Trust the process.
Like Erik ten Hag at Bayer Leverkusen, you mean?
Yeah. He had a great start to life with a 5-1 defeat to Flamengo under 20s But if you look at how the social media of that match went, they started off by saying Bayer Leverkusen 0-1 to Flamengo under-20s. But by the third goal, they forgot to mention it was the under-20 side they were playing against. They had to make it look like it was the seniors, so it wasn't as bad. But we'll see how it goes. Ten Hag has shown in the past that maybe he can do it. He has shown with Ajax he can do it. So we'll see how he gets on in Leverkusen. But I'm still kind of looking to see who they sign to strengthen the areas where they are obviously weaker, since they've made a lot of sales to Liverpool this summer. So yeah, they need to spend some of that Florian Wirtz money to maybe put Ten Hag. But yeah, Ten Hag, maybe if he meets some of his other the people that at Man United, the fans of Man United always like to say he signed players that he knew already. So if he can find someone that he knew already that fits Bayer Leverkusen, maybe he'll do well.
Well, that would be something that Manchester United would be hoping for, that he'd take part of that, the bomb squad, as they've been labelled. A couple of whom he was directly responsible for signing off their hands. Manchester United have managed to shift, or are very close to shifting, 2 of those 5. It's fascinating, really, that you've got Marcus Rashford, Jadon Sancho, Alejandro Garnacho, Antony, one of Ten Hag's players, and Tyrell Malacia, another of Ten Hag's signings, training away from the main squad and being told they can only arrive at Carrington at 5 p.m. to train. In there, you've got 2 of the 4 most expensive players Manchester United have ever signed in terms of transfer fee, in Antony and Jadon Sancho, and 2 players who at different times were considered to be the most valuable forwards at the club, in Rashford and Garnacho. Rashford is going to Barcelona, deal agreed over the weekend, where Barcelona will take Rashford on a free loan. No loan fee paid to Manchester United, but they will take up all of his wages, cover all of his wages for the season, which is a significant bonus for United. And they have an option to buy in the deal. So kind of, as we predicted earlier on in the podcast, that in this summer's series of podcasts, Rashford has managed to extract himself to Barcelona, his choice of club, and Manchester United essentially have got nothing from that deal other than money taken off their wage bill for a player who, if they'd sold even last summer, I think they would easily have achieved 50, 60, 70 million euros for him. Jadon Sancho close to joining Juventus. Information I have from Italy is that deal will be for around 20 million euros, with some easily achieved bonuses added to it. And Juventus covering some of the payoff to Sancho on his remaining Manchester United salary to allow him to move to Italy on a lower salary there.
Yeah, it seems to be another case of Sancho going back or going to a club and Man United paying some of his wages. And we saw at Borussia Dortmund, and the second stint that he had there, Man United paid some of his wages for him to play for Borussia Dortmund, but that didn't go as hoped. There was moments at Chelsea last season where he showed glimpses of what he once was able to do, or why he was so highly valued. But yeah, I think Juventus will be maybe a different environment for him, and hopefully he can get back to his best there, because on his day he is one of these super exciting players that can kind of make you get up off your seat, or get on the edge of your seat, or lean into the television or whatever. He is one of those players, and it's a pity when you see the players that have that sort of technical ability and that sort of excitement, when they are kind of neutered a bit, or the things don't go right for them, and then they kind of lose that spark. So hopefully he can get that spark back at Juventus.
Yeah, and look, the good news for Manchester United is that they have finally concluded the Bryan Mbeumo deal from Brentford. We flagged up on this podcast quite early that Brentford would be difficult to deal with on this transfer, and that they wanted £70 million for the player. They kind of drawn a line in the sand and said until Manchester United or another suitor, and there were other suitors, and Manchester United have managed to stave off Tottenham Hotspur and Newcastle United in their attempts to take Mbeumo. Until someone reached that number, they wouldn't sell. United have finalised the deal at £65 million guaranteed, with £6 million of variable payments, I understand. And they take the player, 25-year-old, who scored 20 Premier League goals last season, 8 assists, and was fourth in the league after Salah, Isak and Erling Haaland. So they now have two number 10s, if you want to call them that, as in the players who play behind the centre forward in Ruben Amorim's system, with Matheus Cunha in as well. Two players who performed exceptionally well, basically had the best statistics of their entire careers in the Premier League last season. And it's going to be interesting to see how they do in Amorim's system. And indeed, if Mbeumo is played in that position, because that's not his natural position at Brentford, it's indeed possible for him to adapt to that and fit it, but it's going to be a difference to him, and he's going to be working in a team which is essentially isn't set up or deliberately set up to maximise his potential. And then we have to wait and see who the centre forward United get to take over as first choice from Rasmus Højlund is. As I said, some discussions about Randall Kolo Muani at present.
There are lots of questions over Manchester United going to this summer, going into the season. I think fans would be happy with the Mbeumo and Cunha signings. I think they'll be impressed with those coming in, because, like you said, they had two terrific seasons in the Premier League last season. But there's also questions leading into that at the kind of behind is Bruno Fernandes. How does he kind of fit in this too? Is he going to be more of a kind of a central midfielder rather than maybe the attacking role that he's sometimes had in the past? So it'll be interesting to see how the system adapt under Ruben Amorim, because, like you mentioned, Mikel Arteta, maybe one of his failings is a lack of alternatives. And does Ruben Amorim have alternatives himself if maybe this doesn't work immediately, or does it need time bedding in? Because there's only so long you can have patience in the manager trying to implement a tactic before you wonder, is it the manager and the tactics that are a problem?
Well, from everything we've seen of Ruben Amorim, pretty much everything he's said and everything I've been told about him from his time in Portugal, I don't think he does change his system. I think he is wedded to this system, and you make a good point about where Bruno Fernandes plays. So the option would be to have him as one of the midfield two, essentially a more defensive role, or to have him as one of the two behind the centre forward, and then perhaps play Mbeumo as the centre forward, which he has done in the past, not often, but he is capable of playing that position. But I don't think he's going to change his way. I don't think he's going to do, for example, what Enzo Maresca did. Enzo Maresca spends best part of a season at Chelsea saying he will not adapt his style of play. He's going to play that way, whatever, and then ends up adapting it, particularly, very obviously in the Club World Cup, and very sensibly, because you don't see Chelsea defeating Paris Saint-Germain, even a tired Paris Saint-Germain, on bad pitches and in high heat and high humidity, playing the kind of football Maresca had Chelsea trying to play at the start of the season. You sit back, you hit on the break, and you play a tight defence, and you get a result that way, and credit to him for doing that. I think you're absolutely right to flag up whether it's important to see whether Amorim is ready to change, but I'll be shocked if he does, because it just doesn't seem to fit his character.
No, it doesn't, but stranger things have happened in football, and Stranger Things season 5 is a big talking point at the moment, so maybe it'll be Stranger Things season 2 for Manchester United.
Oh, before we go off Manchester United, we just flag up Gonçalo Inacio, obviously a Ruben Amorim player at Sporting, has been linked to a move to Manchester United this summer. Guidance I have is there's been no offer for the player. Inacio is available in the market in the sense that his representatives have contacted various clubs to see if there is interest in him, which there is, but Sporting under zero pressure to sell, having already sold Giovanni Kenda to Chelsea for €51 million, and obviously getting ready to bank the money from the sale of Victor Gyokeres. They're working on a replacement signing at centre forward at present, and do not want to be seen to sell any more of their successful squad this summer, and as I say, don't need to. So guidance I have is they would want at least €40 million for Inacio, who's 23-year-old ball-playing centre-back, not really naturally suited to Premier League football in many ways, before they'd even consider negotiating his fee. So the likelihood is that Inacio will end up spending the next season in Portugal.
I saw Tottenham have been making moves, and they are maybe making a move for a surprise candidate in defence that has been linked to the European champions this summer.
Yeah, Ilya Zabarnyi, who Paris Saint-Germain have been working on a deal for about 6 months in reality, but actively working with Bournemouth for 3 months, I'm told. Their offer for the Ukraine centre-back is €60 million, which almost exactly matches his SciSports Analytics estimated transfer value. They believe they should be able to secure the player at that price, and the player definitely wants to come to them, has agreed personal terms with PSG and is pushing for the move. But Tottenham, one of several Premier League clubs who are unsurprisingly interested in the 22-year-old, one of the quickest centre-backs in the Premier League, and almost a perfect attendance record in the Premier League over his 2 seasons at Bournemouth. Guidance from Bournemouth is that Tottenham have offered €70 million for the player, which is owner Bill Foley's asking price, and which would represent a new club record transfer fee for Tottenham, exceeding the initial £55 million, with £10 million of variables that they paid Bournemouth for Dominic Solanke last summer. If Zabarnyi is to move to Tottenham rather than Paris Saint-Germain, Bournemouth will have to convince the player to give up on the idea of joining the European champions for the Europa League winners, and a club who finished well down the English table last season. That, I think, is going to be a difficult ask, but let's see how it pans out over the next week or so. At the same time, Tottenham have to handle the unhappiness of Christian Romero, who wants to leave the club and has been agitating for a move for some while, and is the subject of an offer from Atletico Madrid. And I think if there's a player in world football who was born to be an Atletico Madrid player, it's Christian Romero. And in fact, the way he plays, the physicality of his game, some of the things he does in the football pitch, it wouldn't come as a surprise if you learned that he was Diego Simeone's love child. He's 27, has 2 years of contract left, and Atletico, I think, are the only realistic bidder for the player. My understanding is that Daniel Levy is asking for €70 million as a transfer fee for the player in those negotiations, and Atletico consider that to be so far over a realistic value that they've walked away from talks for the time being. Elsewhere, as you say, Tottenham have done some impressive moves, in particular, I think, taking Mohamed Kudus from West Ham United for a fee of around £55 million. I think Kudus has been a consistently class player in his time at Ajax and at West Ham United, and I think it's just a clear improvement to Tottenham's attack, and also the potential that they will take Morgan Gibbs-White, who I would argue is probably Nottingham Forest's best player, if they can get past the legal action that they've incurred by offering the £60 million release clause in Gibbs-White contract, which was supposed to be secret, and which Forest are not happy about Tottenham finding out what the number was and mysteriously bidding that number.
Yeah, these ones are always pretty special when you hear stuff like that. And another one that came out regarding the Gibbs-White transfer was some eagle-eyed social media user spotted that his wife had just followed 4 beauty salons in London. So I mean, they were joining the dots there. It's the next level up from tracking a plane to land at the airport.
I like that one.
So that's one to follow. Will his wife get her what she wants, or will all the ruminations around the transfer get in the way?
Has Mrs. Gibbs-White opened negotiations with multiple beauty parlours in London to decide which one's going to offer the best service to the family?
Yeah. Friends and family discount. Friends and family discount. You mentioned Bournemouth, obviously, and they have a new goalkeeper as well this summer. The Kepa has gone to Arsenal, like you mentioned on the show, and Georgia Petrovic is coming from Chelsea, and I think that's a shrewd move, although it means that I see another Irish goalkeeper move a bit further on. Mark Travers is then surplus to requirements again, so he's gone to Everton. It's a goalkeeper merry-go-round in the Premier League at the moment.
Yeah, Petrovic. I mean, it's interesting that Bournemouth have gone back to Chelsea for their goalkeeper, having taken what would have been perceived to be something of a gamble in Kepa last summer. We talked on the podcast about how Kepa had set up that deal in a way that he had to perform. The financial details of the contract and the transfer were quite complex, but in a fashion that basically didn't benefit Kepa, and he clearly has performed and ended up getting a move to Arsenal, staying in the London area, and moving there as a backup. Transfer fee for Petrovic, I've been given a very exact number for this, which is £25.593 million for the 25-year-old Serbia goalkeeper. Other goalkeeper moves in the Premier League. Manchester City is definitely a club to pay attention to. Obviously, last summer there was a lot of discussion about Ederson leaving. He did want to leave the club, had an offer from Saudi Arabia, which he had accepted the personal terms on, but then Manchester City refused to accept the transfer fee that was offered from the Saudi Pro League, insisting that they should receive more money. Saudi Pro League said, no, that is the top valuation we give, and Ederson ended up staying at the club. Guidance I have is that Pep Guardiola would be happy to change first choice goalkeepers this summer and will not stand in the way of a transfer if an appropriate fee can be achieved. Who they would replace him with is interesting. Again, I've been told that Gianluigi Donnarumma is an option. We told you several weeks ago in this podcast that Donnarumma's future at Paris Saint-Germain is in doubt, because he's entered the final year of his contract. The contract he arrived on from Milan pays him €10 million net a year, and PSG are not prepared to continue on that salary level. They do want to keep him, but they feel that salary is out of range with the rest of their squad, and have offered him a long-term new deal at a lower level. Donnarumma's yet to tell them whether he wants to stay or not, whether he wants to accept that term. But part of the negotiations have been Paris Saint-Germain saying that if he does not extend his deal, he will be sold this summer. They don't want to let him run his contract down. So there is a strong possibility that Donnarumma will be looking for a top club. He has been mentioned as a candidate to replace Andre Onana at Manchester United. Internazionale, as we said on the podcast several weeks ago, are strongly interested in signing him and bringing him back to Italy. As you can see, that will come down to the player's decision. PSG have placed it in a position where it will be up to a player who was recently named the best goalkeeper in the world to choose where he plays next season. Another option for Manchester City, which won't go down well at Newcastle United, is for them to bring James Trafford back from Burnley. Newcastle United have been trying to sign Trafford for well over a year now, but have never met Burnley's asking price. Last summer it was £30 million. And this summer the latest offer that I am aware of is of £25 million plus bonuses, which again is short of what Burnley want for a player who had an exceptional season in the Championship. Manchester City, as they have with many of their younger players who they sell to other English clubs, inserted a buyback in the deal, which would basically allow them to take Trafford at the cheapest price of any club in world football this summer. They will be able to take him for less than Burnley would be able to achieve on the open market, selling him to someone like Newcastle. I think it's interesting to see if City decide that Trafford is at a level where they want him to come back. Certainly last summer there was no interest from them in taking him back from Burnley when Burnley were open to selling him at the right price. And whether Manchester City think he would be a first choice goalkeeper for them, because I think it would be harder to persuade Trafford to come back to be the backup at City when he has the opportunity to go to Newcastle United and fight directly for the starter shirt against Nick Pope, and with the expectation that he would achieve that.
Yeah, it's one where the player in both these kind of scenarios, Donnarumma and Trafford, kind of seem to have the ball in their court a bit to decide their own future, and that's obviously what you most like to see in football, is the players deciding what's best for them and being able to make that the decision for themselves. Yeah, you kind of wonder if Trafford were to go to Man City, would it be the right choice for either him or Man City? Because I know he's performed brilliantly at Burnley, but it's a different level playing at a Newcastle or Man City, but particularly a Man City, a team who expect to win the Premier League every season, and also expect to compete for the Champions League and get to the latter stages. And I think Newcastle may be a better option for him, but if they're not willing to pay what Burnley want, then maybe it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I think Newcastle stylistically, in the way they defend, much closer to Burnley than Manchester City are, which is part of the transition as a goalkeeper. Can you fit in the overall tactical system, and probably nowhere more so than with Pep Guardiola and the way he uses his goalkeepers.
Yeah, you saw Stefan Ortega at some points that he was able to do it for Pep Guardiola Man City, and at other points he wasn't. And yeah, it's such a big learning curve for any player to in any position to go to Pep Guardiola's teams and succeed. So it's no different for a goalkeeper. So it will be a huge move for someone like James Trafford. But if he believes in himself, well, he believes in himself. We move on to our hero and villain of the show, and I hope you enjoyed our Easter egg in last week's program, Duncan. I know you made it that far. You text me about it, so I know you made it that far.
No more villains being chosen by Ronan Murphy as the outcome of last week's Easter egg.
Good. Yeah, so I can only say that you're my hero for this week because you're back. But if I don't get to choose you as the hero this week because you're back with me, I will choose Gianpiero Gasperini as my hero of the week. The Roma boss, the former Atalanta boss, who had great success bringing on young players at Atlanta, winning the Europa League against Bayer Leverkusen, obviously in 2024. But he's the Roma boss now, and he is the man that is going to breathe life into Evan Ferguson. That's what I'm hoping, that Evan Ferguson got a hero's welcome. Speaking of heroes, he got a hero's welcome in Rome on Sunday night when he touched down in Rome. So I hope that Gianpiero Gasperini can bring Evan Ferguson back to life and make him into the player that every Irish person wants him to be, because when you watch him, you can see that this guy is special, but we haven't seen it in such a long time since he kind of come back from that injury, or maybe was brought back too soon from injury, and then he had a nightmare spell at West Ham. And actually last season he scored more goals for Ireland than he did for both West Ham and Brighton combined. So hopefully that's not going to happen again this season, and he can be Ireland's biggest Serie A success since Liam Brady back in the 1980s.
A much better choice than last week, Ronan, and interesting to see how your tune changes when I'm on the podcast. But villain of the week, I'm going to go for Crystal Palace, and the way they've presented their campaign to avoid being demoted from the Europa League into the UEFA Conference League. I understand the degree of outrage around it, but I think it's a bit disingenuous of Crystal Palace to blame UEFA for this, given that these rules were not exactly private. They've been in place for a year. We've had multiple discussions about blind trusts, about Jim Ratcliffe having to divest his hands-on ownership of Nice in order to take sporting control of Manchester United, even though he's not the majority owner. Ratcliffe giving interviews about it. It's been no secret in football. So I think Crystal Palace have to take on some responsibility for failing to do what is quite straightforward preventative work. There is a way to set up the multi-club ownership in order for both clubs to compete in the same European competition. And if they'd done that, we wouldn't be in this situation where they are going to the Court of Arbitration for Sport to try and overturn a UEFA decision, and also implying that another Premier League club, Nottingham Forest, are responsible for their predicament in European competition. Steve Parish is one of the top operators in English football. Huge amount of respect for what he's achieved at that club, but I think in this case, Parish and his club have dropped the ball.
Yeah, they definitely have. We've seen it happen a few times with this multi-club model, and there's been disappointment to fans of many clubs, but you kind of have to wonder, are the higher-ups in the clubs, or the people kind of involved in this, actually going about their business properly or paying attention to the business? Because we've seen it so often in the past that teams that are owned by the same company can get around these rules. So the procedures are in there. You know what you should have to do, and you should be able to do it. Especially if you are a multi-club ownership model, you should know going in that how to get around these things, because the blueprint is already there to follow.
Yeah, John Textor was the biggest shareholder at Crystal Palace, even if he had no effective control over the club. And the argument Parish and Palace are making is that he doesn't have effective control. But again, the solution was a straightforward one. And it kind of makes you think that they didn't expect to qualify for European competition, therefore didn't do any of the preparatory work, which makes some of the statements that Parish has been making over the past days kind of even more questionable. He's talking about Europa League. They could win the Europa League, and that could give them the opportunity to make the Champions League, and that could change the future of the club. Now, he's not wrong about all of those possibilities. It is possible that Crystal Palace could win the Europa League, and that could get them into the Champions League, and that would make a fundamental difference to the economics of the club. But that kind of underlines why they should have done their homework and been aware of the possibility they could qualify for European competition, and done what is not a complex and a novel or unusual bit of legal reorganisation that would have avoided this problem from ever happening.
Yeah, they've only got themselves to blame is the way we're going to put it.
I think that's right in this case. Sadly.
Yeah. So, as always, we have our audience survey. If you'd like to fill that in and let us know what you like about the show, maybe what you don't like or would like improved, the link is in our show notes and our social media platforms. We also have a Football Transfers app where you can get news and updates, breaking news, transfer rumours, done deals straight to your phone on iOS and Android. And like we mentioned earlier, you can become a member on YouTube if you want more fun and frolics from the Transfers podcast. So thanks very much, as always, Duncan.
Thank you, Ronan.
You've been listening to the Transfers podcast, powered by FootballTransfers.com. If you like what you heard, spread the word. Please follow, share and rate us. You can message us on Instagram, YouTube and Facebook at Transfers Podcast. Our Twitter, Blue Sky and TikTok address is at TransfersCast. I'm on Twitter at SwearingNotPaul, Instagram at GoalRonan, and Blue Sky at Ronan Murphy, just to confuse you. It's different everywhere. Duncan is the same everywhere, not to confuse you, at Duncan Castles. Our production is by Mark Caulfield at Pro Podcast Production, and our music is by Mark Caulfield and David L. Stay safe, be well, and thank you for listening.
We did the transfer window.